Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Public Works Finance Committee of the Moscow City Council for Monday, September 11th, 2017. First order of business on today's agenda is approval of the Public Works Finance Committee August 14th, 2017 minutes. Entertain a motion to do so.
So moved.
Second. I'm good.
Okay. So no problem with them, so I'll make that unanimous. We'll approve the minutes.
Excellent.
Item number 2 is a disbursement report for August 2017. Sarah Banks will tell us what we spent money on.
And looking at the major expenditure report, they totaled $2,769,427. The largest expenditure for August was payroll. That came in at $1,108,977. If you go down the list, you'll look under capital outlay, and we had some pretty significant payments there that I wanted to point out. We had 5 different ones. 2 of them were for our booster station. One came in at $197,898, and the other was $70,395. We had our Southwest trunk line. There was a payment for $239,383, and then we had 2 payments for well 10. One for $82,126, and one more, sorry. Oh, no, actually, that was just one payment for $82,126. And then we had 3rd Street grind and inlay, $263,353. That was our major expenditures.
Numbers I saw on the
Yeah.
sheet. Nothing had extra zeros on it, so anybody else see any extra problems there?
No extra problem, but one extra comment. We actually made a payment to a company by the name of Most Dependable Fountains, Inc. Now, that's a pretty neat company name. But that was for the new drinking water fountain at the East City Park, or Triangle Park, as somebody called it. And that was done because of a young lady's request to the city council and the staff determining that water fountains are a good item to have at playgrounds. And we got it in. I am shocked at what a water fountain costs, even if it does have a dog bowl and a bottle filler on it. But and that's not the total cost of that fountain, because they had to run water across the park and other work to make it operable. But glad to see that one, and I think they're looking toward finding a way to get them at the other parks as we gradually get playgrounds put in around town.
Excellent. Good comment. I remember it was Ms. Noon, I think, sent us that letter.
And I finally met that young lady at one of the Vandal things, so good on her for bringing it up.
She probably thinks you're the President of the United States because you got that done.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, I guess I would entertain a motion that we go ahead and sign the disbursement reports for August. Everybody okay with that?
Good.
Sure.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, moving right along to item number 3. We'll be talking about the retention of Presnell Gage accountants to conduct the city audit. And since Gary's not here, Jen's going to give us a rundown on that.
I'll step in and try to provide an overview. So per Idaho Code, the City Council is required to do a full and complete audit of the city's finances each year. We have worked with Presnell Gage for several years now, and that stemmed from an RFQ that went out back in 2010 or 2011. Due to the transition, staff is recommending that we engage with Presnell Gage again for this year's audit, and then also to look at a 5-year renewal for their services for other audits in the future. So let's see here. They have been with us for, I believe, the past 17 years. Mm-hmm. Within the past 13, we've also been very happy to receive the government, and this is where I need Sarah's help for sure, the GFOA
award. Yep, the GFO
Government
for
Finance
auditing.
Officers something. I can't
Excellence
remember.
in auditing.
Excellence, thank you. Which has been quite a pleasure to work with them on that as well.
Gina?
Tell me the 5-year thing again.
So we would
Please.
engage with them this year, and then we would have each year have the option to renew that contract with a
Beautiful.
small escalator.
There
There is
what I wanted to
one
hear.
side note, there's one word we need to change in that agreement, and that is, instead of, under the scope of services section, the term unqualified opinion was used, and the correct term is unmodified opinion. It's just a language change on that.
Used to be the former.
Quite a
It used to be the
significant
former,
amount.
which is why it was probably included the way it was, but it should be shifted to unmodified opinion. So we'll make that small change should it be approved and move forward.
Does this agreement extend to the Urban Renewal Agency as well?
It does.
So they would be doing a separate audit for, and the same terms and conditions would apply to that as well?
Correct. And that is laid out within that contract as well.
And the Urban Renewal Agency pays for their part of the audit.
Correct.
Okay.
I'm okay with it.
Me too.
Consent as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned.
I think it's a consent agenda thing. It's
Yep.
business as usual. We're perpetuating something we've done in the past and
Yeah,
without any
I've
real
worked,
changes.
I've worked with them on a lot of cities, and I'm perfectly happy with them, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Item number 4 is the 2017 Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program. Situation where we have the opportunity to make some improvements on the Bridge Street Bridge and do some water bypass on Paradise Creek to mitigate the flooding problems what we saw this year. Looks like it's about a $2 million project, but Les can fill us in on what the deal is with that.
Well, good afternoon. Elisa and I will both take a stab at filling you in on this. So just to give you a little bit of background, back in March of this year, we had a flood event, as you may all recall, and out of that came some efforts that Elisa worked on to work with the state and federal agencies regarding flood disaster relief. And we worked with the folks from FEMA at a federal level and also at a state level regarding that. We applied for a number of different things that we felt were being damaged over the course of the winter regarding some of the streets and areas of flooding up around Joseph Street, ball fields, those kind of things. One of the things that popped up in that discussion was the fact that the Bridge Street area, those representatives felt would be a good candidate for the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, which was not what we were applying for at the time. It's a program that's been around quite a while at a federal level. Normally you compete at a federal level, nationwide, when you apply for those. But they felt that that Bridge Street area, because of the constriction of flow at Bridge Street itself, by the bridge on Bridge Street, would be a good candidate to perhaps apply for funding to replace that bridge and alleviate some of the flooding history that we've had in that location. So that's kind of how we got into this to begin with. So I'm going to talk with you a little bit about what the project looks like to be. Lisa can fill in as appropriate on the process, but just to help orient you a little bit, we'll start with this overview. Excuse me. So this is Mountain View, running north-south here, D Street, east-west, 3rd Street, 6th Street, in those areas. The blue represents Paradise Creek, generally speaking, on its route through. And a couple of areas of interest, of course, the Bridge Street Bridge is located right there on that little short stretch of one block of Bridge Street. And then Brink Park comes into play because that is kind of the outer edge of our project area, so to speak. The floodplains for this area, as mapped by FEMA over the years, look generally like this. So you can see this is the 100-year floodplain boundary. You can see where it's out of the channels up in that through that Fosburg property area, approaching the D Street Bridge. Gets a little bit more constrained as you work down through the Mosier area, and then on down along Roosevelt, and then widens out considerably as you get down in the area of the ball fields and Brink Park. Some of this was impacted through work that was done previously with the big bypass system that runs along the west side of the ball field site. It was installed after the 1996 flood events. Some of this was impacted in terms of the boundaries or areas of flooding by the Joseph Street Bridge project that was done back in about 2003. So we've addressed some of those areas to the south, but the areas up here we're still seeing issues. And, not as extensive in a footprint, generally speaking, but we see recurring flooding happening above Bridge Street, up into the Fosburg properties, all the way up into the D Street area, and even downstream of the bridge itself, getting into some of these homes right in this area of Bridge Street. And then we've had challenges over the years as you get down to the area of Roosevelt, and we've done some things to help alleviate some of that, but we still fight it every time we have major events. So out of this discussion with FEMA, we thought, okay, let's take a look at the Bridge Street itself and what could be done. So we'll zoom in here just slightly. And the initial thought, of course, is, well, we've got essentially a multi-culvert system there that's supposed to be a bridge, but it's actually a series of, I think, 4 or 5 box culverts all side by side with a lot of constrictions within it and not nearly enough capacity. So the initial thought is, well, let's make an application to replace those culverts with a new free-span bridge as the most likely candidate. That would help alleviate that restriction in flow that occurs and causes some of that backup to the north. Of course, anytime you think about making changes in a channel or removing restrictions or constrictions, you have to also think about downstream, because now that storage that's been happening up in that area in that floodplain wouldn't necessarily continue to occur, so it's going to go downstream. What's the impact of that? So out of that, we felt, well, maybe there would be some downstream channel modifications that would be necessary, perhaps in this area. I will tell you that for the most part, this is all private property, backyards, and individual lots, so we would have to do a lot of work with the property owners through here to accomplish any projects within this hatched area. But it's something that we think would be appropriate to look at and see if there's some things there perhaps could be done to make sure we're not creating any other problems, and preferably actually reduce any potential for flooding of those homes as you go on downstream of Bridge Street. Well, obviously this doesn't end here at Mountain View. We've had issues in the floodplain grows considerably when you get down to the area of Roosevelt and all that. So we looked a little further, and an idea that we developed was the concept of doing something similar to the Joseph Street, the Joseph Ballfields bypass. So that big ditch line that's west of the ball fields, to do something like that, but to run it essentially from this point where the creek meets Mountain View to a point down here where the creek again crosses under the Mountain View from the west at Brink Park. This would have a similar concept in terms of it would be a high flow situation where when the creek got up high enough it would overflow some of its volume into this system and then run down the east side of Mountain View and then back into the creek up here by the Brink Park area. In this case, it would not be, we don't believe, an open channel. It would be underground piping. And the reason for that is we have a trail system that runs in the same general area. We have some limited areas in here because of topography where this area is above Mountain View, so we've got some slope coming down to Mountain View itself. So it just lends itself much better to an underground pipe network, a 48-inch diameter pipe or 2, depending on how it all works out. With that in mind, we have then pursued a concept essentially including these 3 components for improvements. However, in order to determine what exactly these improvements should look like, we felt it's appropriate to also perform a hydraulic analysis to look at the hydraulic capacity of this area of the creek. What exactly does the bridge need to look like? What could maybe be done within this channel area in here? What's the effect of putting in a larger diameter pipeline along the east side of Mountain View and working through all of that? So back in August, Elisa put together the notice of intent letter to the feds, and I think that's included in your packet. And it outlined essentially this project. Now, I will tell you that since that time, even as late as about 3 hours ago this morning, we were working on this and refining some things, and we're continuing to do that. The project is proposed as a multi-phase, so we'd start out with a hydraulic assessment. In the packet that's in front of you, it says it's about a $50,000 study. The discussion we had this morning, we looked at expanding the scope of that hydraulic study to look further at downstream impacts to make sure we're not creating further issues on downstream, essentially all the way down to US 95. So at the moment, we're thinking that we've got a placeholder in our preliminary budget of about $100,000 for the study. It may be that, it may be something less than that, until we can further refine that number to expand the scope even beyond what we submitted to you just last week for today's packet. We also are going to continue to work on refining the cost estimates and making adjustments on that. As this comes back to council next week, we may have some different numbers for you at that point, but we're looking in that 2.1 million range if it all goes as anticipated. As part of this process, it's a multi-phase application process. Maybe, Lisa, it'd be best if you touched on that.
So right now, because we're under the Presidential Disaster Declaration, the Idaho Office of Emergency Management is our agency that we're working with. And under this declaration, they are accepting applications from state and local governments and nonprofits for these types of projects. And they'll work with us once our application is submitted. And there's a 30-day process before then their application needs to be submitted to FEMA. And so the process is that we need to submit our application as if it's an entire project at this point in time. And knowing that we're really just looking at what the phase one, at this given time, looking at what phase one will tell us, which is the hydrology study. And at that point in time, once that if we were approved and they were to come back to us and say, let's move forward with this project, we would resubmit another application. However, the process is you do the full project up front. At this point in time, we don't know what the outcome will be. However, they want us to submit that now as a total project. And as part of this, there's a benefit cost analysis that goes with it, and we're working with Alta, who is the prior staff of Terra Graphics, has now renamed and is operating, and they are working with us preparing the benefit cost analysis. So we're also still in the process of putting together some of the data that we need for that. So we will submit this application next Thursday, and then we have 30 days to work with the Idaho Office of Emergency Management staff prior to the submittal to FEMA. So that will still flush out some additional information. At that point, we anticipate that we would hear sometime in the first quarter of next year of 2018 on whether or not we were approved. At that point, then there's some steps in the process where you obligate your funding, and that could take anywhere from 6 months to a year. And with a lot of the things going on in the nation right now with flooding and hurricanes and disasters, it could be longer than that. If you'd asked me that 2 months ago, I would have, could have given you a more relatively pointed answer that we would be looking at the first quarter. However, I just don't know. So even though we're looking at a large dollar amount here, it's a process that we'll go through and it'll be staged. So an additional application then will be submitted, and we're not exactly sure of the process yet. It may go through the Idaho Emergency Management, Idaho Office of Emergency Management, or we may reapply directly to FEMA. But from what I've been told from staff on both the FEMA side and the Idaho Office of Emergency Management is that let's get this application in, let's get it in the door, let's let the people that understand and know about these projects see what's there, and we'll stage it as we go. And so they really encouraged us to take this first step, even though it wasn't something that was really on our capital projects list to conquer this next year and to get our feet in the door. And I anticipate that this would be somewhere from a 5 to 6 year process as we go along. And certainly we'll be bringing back all changes or requests to the council as we hear back from them, and making sure that we are capable and able to move forward with the ongoing costs of possibly taking care of this. I think it's important that we move forward with this now because we're competing on a state level right now versus a national level as we would be if we weren't in a presidential declaration. So it gives us an opportunity that we may not have again, and so I think it's a good time to take advantage of this opportunity. And so that's why we've kind of diligently moved forward based on the recommendation. And we had several gentlemen here from FEMA one day that, were the ones that actually said, oh, we're not here to take a look at that project right now, but you really need to submit this. So we're moving forward.
Hey, one other thing I should mention is the funding level on these. Of course, it's estimates at this point. There is a local match required, and this one's probably larger than we're used to, and it's in the range of 25%. It varies a bit as you work your way through the project. So long term, if this was a project that was ultimately funded through FEMA and it was a $2 million project, we're looking at roughly a $500,000 local match. So that is a fair amount for the city to come up with over the next 2, 3, maybe 4 budget cycles. And so that is a consideration that we've talked about quite a bit with administration, finance. We think, again, at this point, it probably still makes sense, even with that, to pursue it now at a state level for the first phase, with the idea that we would have some time to work out the rest of the financials moving forward. But wanted you to be aware that there is that type of a commitment if this project moves on through the process.
This, the first phase where it's just a hydrological study, we can do this in pieces. We could get a hydrological study that would help us make decisions even if we didn't get this. In other words, I can see where this impacts a lot of things downstream.
Good.
It maybe has some effect on how much, how big the bridge needs to be at 3rd Street that we're building in terms of flow. If we can take half the flow in an emergency situation and run it across the street, it makes a difference. How much water will have to go under that bridge in an emergency situation. It's going to impact the underpasses, the bicycle pedestrian underpasses downstream of Highway 8, and there'll be some impact on that, too. If there's more higher flows there, it'll maybe more days of the year that those aren't usable.
And keeping in mind, of course, as the further downstream you go, there's less and less effect because it does tend to get lost in the overall flows that are happening. But yes, it certainly could have some influence on what's going on downstream on other projects, certainly.
Also, when things are building out on the east side of Mountain View, if that's not buried at the outset, then you'll have to dig up the street and to put that in. So that might be a way to approach that. Like, this is a piece that needs to be done anyway.
And I think, getting our foot in the door and having this project be out there and in the queue, like I said, it's an opportunity that we may not have again. And so, I think following through is a very good idea at this time.
What do you think, Mr.
Oh,
Steve?
I like it and want to commend staff of whoever's found out that this was possible and something that we could do. A question based on what Jim just said, though. You're applying for the full $2 million while laying out the fact that the study is expected to be this much of it and construction's this much, I presume by scope of work on the construction. Is it incrementally funded? Do you get the study money and then have to apply again for the construction money, or have you already done it, or how does that work?
You apply for your total project, and then there's a staged process that you go through where you amend your application based upon what the study results are, and then the capability of what the city is able to move forward with.
So we would get, if we got initial approval and award, it would be for the study money.
That's what is anticipated as Phase 1 funding.
That's the way it will work. Okay.
Yes.
So you're right.
I may. We've done something similar to this, where it's a whole chunk of a project, but we've phased it, correct? Am I dreaming that? This is sounding pretty familiar.
Well,
I don't know if it's maybe URA that I've listened to or what it is, but this does not sound unfamiliar.
Yeah, there are projects, Mountain View Road is a good example,
Yeah.
where it is partially complete. We've gone through the preliminary design, environmental, some of the geotechnical, archaeological, historical things have been completed. Final design is still pending, right-of-way still pending, construction still pending. So yes, we've done that type of thing in the past.
Okay.
I think A Street was
Similar
another
to that,
example.
yeah. A little bit longer life on that one, but yes.
Let's go back to your floodplain map and a question on that briefly. Is that that's the 100-year floodplain. Is that the current floodplain map? And secondly, was that done prior to the improvements that you mentioned that have been done, the overflow channel and some other work?
After the 1996 flood, when the channel was constructed, I believe that there were changes in the floodplain that occurred in the 98 or 9 timeframe, and I believe this may reflect that. I would need to confirm that for sure, but this I pulled off of one of our base utility maps this morning, and I believe it is current
The map
after those changes.
was updated in 2001.
2001.
And this is the 2001?
I believe so.
Could you check and let me know, please?
Certainly.
I was not aware the floodplain extended that far.
It's still
west
large.
of Mountain View.
Right. It is still large. And one of the things that we talked about this morning with the idea of perhaps expanding the scope of the hydraulic study down to US 95 is everything west of 95 to the state line has been mapped previously, and that was done with the Paradise Creek realignment work on the campus and the daylighting project and Student Rec Center and all of that. And part of the thought here is that as we go from essentially D Street
Tie the
down
two
to
studies together.
95, tie the two studies together, and it gives us some of the documentation necessary to perhaps update that floodplain map with more current information, and then ultimately, if any changes are made that we are successful, then update it even further to reflect those changes in the floodplain.
And one last thing, you've made application recently, several months or a year, for a new bridge on 6th Street. That was not successful.
That's correct.
This hydraulic study would help with the future rebuilding of that particular bridge as well, because you would have new data
It
to
certainly,
talk about how to build it.
I think it would help support those applications in the future.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's all I've got. I'm a fan.
I am too. I like the staged approach that makes the decision-making a little bit easier too, so.
Yeah, I think it's great to get our foot in the door on any chance we have of getting assistance with these projects, so I think we should move it ahead for approval, and it's probably a consent agenda item. It's,
Unless you want to publicize it.
yeah,
I like consent.
I think, yeah, until we have more information. If we have
Okay.
more information between now and the meeting, I'd like to hear it, but
Well, we can certainly update the packet with any new numbers that may come to light over the next few days, and anything else that we need to.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 5 is the Humbleburger Modest Music Fest street closure request. Jen's going to talk about that. We're going to close the street with no beer garden attached to it, and
There we go.
be
Humbleburger is coordinating a community event they're calling Modest Music Fest. It's the first of its kind for this particular type of arrangement. We've, of course, had different music fests, Rendezvous in the Park, some of those types of things that have happened before. This one's a little bit different. They've organized more than 30 bands at various venues throughout Moscow on October 7th and 8th. It's a Saturday and a Sunday. The organizers have worked with, it's Humbleburgers, of course, Mikey's, One World, Last Frontier, and then they've got other sponsors, local businesses throughout Moscow, including NRS, CMSI, The Storm Cellar, Moscow Food Co-op, Allegra Print and Imaging, Hungadunga Whiskey Barrel Cider Company, and Carlton Electric. The final event of the festival on October 8th is proposed to be held in downtown Moscow on 1st Street, right near Humbleburger's location, their storefront location. They are asking to close the street, and because of the Music Fest and the costs that they're investing in this, we're hoping to have ticketed patrons only within the closed part of the street there. It is on a Sunday evening. There are businesses that surround that area that they've spoken with to, one, be sure that it wouldn't impede business for the street closure. And then the second consideration, and the reason we're bringing it to you in this manner, is that it's a departure from a typical street closure that we would do for an event. The most similar type of event that we have like this would be Rendezvous, but it's in a park, not on a public right-of-way. It's a little bit different. The real purpose behind Humbleburgers trying to do this is to bring local talent and regional musical talent together to highlight Moscow as a place that's got a lot of music talent and as a kind of a place to come visit, really, and as a tourism, economic development type driver. one of the issues that staff thinks about in these types of situations, and again, why we brought it to council or to committee today, is to do this as a pilot project, but to also keep in mind what impacts this may have if others want to do similar types of things, particularly in the right-of-way. It's that one little piece there that makes it a little bit different than anything else we've done. So really trying to do, and it's rather on a small scale, it's one block of First Street, it's not actually on Main Street, but to look at this as a test and as a way for us to gauge how it might work for us to continue to do community-type events, especially those that are sponsored by people in the community rather than the city or something like that putting these events on, which we love to do, but it's great when other people love to do it as well. But then also looking at if this becomes a really popular type of thing to do we need to limit the number of events? Does it even work in the first place? So thought that Humble Burger's approach might be a good way for us to take a look at this, and with a few sideboards on there, given that it's a Sunday evening and some of those other things, to see how it might work for us. We do have Nate from Humble Burger here to provide some more information on the Music Fest and any other questions that you may have for either staff or him.
Come on up and talk, Nate. Sit at the table.
Name and address, please.
Yes.
Nate Wolf. I live at 528 North Hayes Street in Moscow.
So the information in the packet's pretty self-explanatory, I think. You can see the diagram of where the street closure would be and that there's an emergency pathway to the south, and everything looks, I don't see it's any different than the block party situation that we have already in place. And it's certainly bringing economic activity to the town, so I really can't see any negatives in this whole thing. If you have any, if you want to put in a plug for anything, go right ahead, and be glad to hear it.
Yeah, not really. I don't know. I just wanted to try. Sorry.
Thank you.
I wanted to try something like this out just to see what the reception would be in Moscow. We did a similar music festival over in Pullman with another group I was involved in about 7 years ago. But I really wish at the time we'd been able to do it in Moscow, but it just didn't work out. So this is kind of an attempt to try it here and see how it goes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have any problems with it. I've got three questions. Does staff, PD, legal, admin have any concerns about this? Any flags?
No, really, it would just be a typical street closure, like either the city's done, ours is a little bit bigger scale, we do a little bit larger area, but we've had other Bootzer's pub and coffee house has done a street closure before. The only difference here is that it would only be ticketed patrons allowed within the boundary of the street closure. Everything else, public safety services, we do the same street closure permit process that we do for those other events. So
10 p.m. is the...
that's the one. Is it 10 p.m. or is it 11?
Yeah, we're shooting for 10, but I'm going to file for the extension anyways in case it goes over that.
Safe.
I've
Yeah.
never heard of an extension that would go to 11.
We've
Ronnie
typically
Boone Park
only
is
done
10.
10.
Okay.
And so
That
that
was
may
the
be a
upper
consideration. That may be the
Yeah.
consideration in the permit process. That 10
I don't know if
is
that's
the-
statutory or not, but I've never been involved in a number of noise permits for things, and 10 o'clock seems to be,
10 seems to be the number I remember, and First Street points right up into East Hill.
They would also, I believe the way this band would be set up, it'd be pointing towards downtown,
Yeah.
not up the hill.
Okay. And then another question, security. Do they provide their own? They provide their own fencing, control of ticket people and all that? And do we anticipate any addition, even though we're not in the beer garden business, do we anticipate any additional police presence?
We typically let our police know if there's an activity going on down there. We have not done a street closure like this without a beer garden, so I would want to touch base with Chief Fry to see what he would expect or what he would propose would be a good fit.
Well, I'm impressed, calling it modest when you've got 30 bands.
It got a little bit out of control with
I,
the booking.
I did an event 50 years ago with 2 bands, and I called it a battle, so I don't know.
I'm in favor of it as well. I think anything that is positive economic development and/or benefit to the community is good. I'll probably be in the crowd.
Awesome.
I would recommend that we put this on a regular agenda just from a promotional standpoint so that it gets out in the world
Yeah.
more.
Sounds good.
And, a little discussion at the council meeting wouldn't hurt. So anything we can do to promote that kind of activity is good with me.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See you next Monday.
All right.
All right, that's the last item on our agenda for today, so I would entertain a motion to adjourn from the crowd here.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you all for coming.